because I've always been practicing like, hey, if you can narrate your audiobook, do it. It's a great way to do things. You can stay connected with your audience. They will be more invested in your audiobook than say if you just get somebody else. So there was some nervousness on this one because I was so worried that my audience would receive it poorly and go, ugh, Dale, yeah, stick to the videos, no good with the audiobooks.
Today, I'm super excited to present a very special guest, none other than Mr. Dale L. Roberts himself. Dale L. Roberts is a self-publishing advocate, award-winning author, and video content creator. Dale's inherent passion for life fuels his self-publishing advocacy. After self-publishing over 50 titles and becoming an international bestseller on Amazon, Dale started his YouTube channel, Self-Publishing with Dale, which was voted by FeedSpot among the top 50 YouTube channels about self-publishing. I've known Dale for about 6 years now and can tell you he's a down-to-earth guy and knows self-publishing. So without further ado, thanks so much for coming to the channel to discuss all things audiobooks.
No, dude, I'm excited to be here, and that was an awesome entrance. Like, to be honest with you, it's just kind of surreal because I think you started watching me, and now I get to start watching you.
Yeah, I mean, we've known each other for about 6 years, and I think this is the second time that we've connected doing an interview, but this time I got you on my channel. So I'm really thankful for that, and I appreciate you coming over here and taking the time out of your day to go and share your knowledge and your experience with the audience here.
I'm just excited. So I'm an open book. What do we have on on tap today?
All right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about your experience self-publishing your own audiobook. My first question for you is, why did you end up narrating your own audiobooks?
For so long of me being in self-publishing, I wasn't able to, first of all, afford it,
Mm-hmm.
much less, have the time to sit down, buy the equipment, learn how to do it and everything else like that. So I ended up doing a lot of 50-50 royalty splits when I first came into it, which, by the way, worst decision ever.
Sure.
It's no knock on the narrators. They did
Mm-hmm.
fantastic, and boy, they won like big time on this one because they ended up making so much more money this way than if I were to do it finished price per hour. But I've always had the belief that readers are going to be more invested in getting your audiobook if it's you, the author, that's narrating it. So my main reason was very selfish. I wanted to do it since day one and couldn't afford it. Now, I'm not telling you that it's going to be a good idea for me to do, you know, audiobook narration with the setup that I currently have. It's not very realistic. It doesn't have all the great elements that you're going to need, say, in a whisper booth or anything else like that. So that's why I reached out to a local studio called Amerisound Studios, and he cut me a really, really good deal. So I was able to go in. He handled all the engineering and editing and mastering. All I had to do was just show up and talk.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. You were able to find a studio just to hook you up like that. That's awesome.
It was it was actually by luck, to be honest with you. Years ago when I was in a metal band, we had recorded at this
Oh
studio,
wow.
and I was like, when I thought about it, I'm like, wait, why don't I reach out to him? He's got state of the art equipment. His studio's amazing. It's right around the corner. I was shocked to see that he was charging the same hourly rate that he did in the 90s
Oh wow.
here in the 20s. I was just like, and I said to him, I'm like, man, you probably should increase your rates. He's like, yeah, I know I should. But he's just like, I enjoy doing this. And so yeah, it was really a pleasant surprise, being able to work at somewhere. And the funny thing is, the previous time of me being in those studios in a metal band, I actually had hair.
He's probably like, who is this?
He didn't recognize me.
Oh
That was
wow.
the funny thing.
Wow. Goodness. So let's walk back a little bit. Like, what happened next after you decided to narrate your own audiobooks? I mean, what were the steps that you took to actually accomplish this?
Ooh, you have to sit down and go through your entire manuscript with a fine-tooth comb because in my instances of nonfiction, there are some things that make sense when you're reading it. but when you're actually listening to it, it doesn't make sense at all. So, for
Mhm.
instance, it could probably be like, "Visit this link." Yeah, that's great visiting a link that's clickable, say, in your
Yeah.
ebook or even something else, but it probably doesn't make so much sense over an audiobook. So you have to go through and read it as if you were listening to it. And one of the ways that I did was I took Microsoft Word, I put in the
Mhm.
text to talk speech thing, and I just sat back and I just listened. And then when something would come up, I go, "Ooh, that sounds weird." I went ahead and fixed it.
Yeah.
I learned a little bit of a tip from Joanna Penn when it comes
Mhm.
to fiction. When you're putting your fiction stories together, you'll want to really get it dialed in too, because another thing that doesn't make as much sense is he said, she said,
Yeah.
when you can probably just have the character voice and you're just
Mhm.
voicing it out. So I find it so fascinating because I've always been the rights holder. I've never
Yeah.
been the narrator before. So when I got, into the whole process, I didn't really realize how much voiceover talent and narrators go
Oh,
through
yeah.
just to read the book into a microphone.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot involved. Um, did you when you were, I guess, preparing for this, were there any, guides or references that you took and kinda ran with? I know you mentioned Joanna Penn. Was there any other references or guides or anything
I
like that that helped you?
ACX University is really good.
Mhm.
They have a lot of information, 100% free over on YouTube, and I've
Yeah.
watched a handful of them. Um, I would say I need to probably do a lot more studying because I went into my first audiobook was relatively easy. It was 2 hours of content. So I was actually relatively right around between 2.5 hours to 3 hours of
Okay.
actual work because it was nice. We had a nice little flow going. I'd mess up. He would just punch back in,
Gotcha.
and then I would just continue reading. So that was
That's
kind of
nice.
nice. But yeah, overall though, the whole process has been eye-opening for sure. I'm not sure, did they answer the question?
A roundabout way, yeah. I mean, what I'm looking for is, I guess, something that is actionable information for the
Yeah.
listeners to kinda take
Mm,
and run with so they can use the same resources potentially that you used or the same
yeah.
steps or processes to go and make their own audiobook. And I know you mentioned ACX University and their
Mhm.
website. Um, that's good information, but I will say, just as a caveat, ACX is very slanted, obviously, towards their own business.
Yes, they
So
are.
they're not going to tell you everything you need to know if you want a career in this. They'll tell
Mhm.
you what you need to know to produce an audiobook, but not how to maximize your income with audiobooks.
Yeah.
When you stepped into the booth for the first time, what was your gut reaction? What were you feeling?
Nervous as hell.
Yeah.
'Cause I was like, "Okay, am I wearing all the right clothes?" So,
Mhm,
because they always say, "Don't wear, like, clothes that are gonna create a lot of friction and background
mhm.
movement." I also made sure that I didn't eat too much food, but I ate enough food
Yeah.
that my belly wasn't gurgling,
Mhm.
during production. There was so many safe practices that I heard and learned, but I think nerves was the biggest thing,
Yeah.
and it showed initially within the first, like, 10 minutes because the engineer stopped and he goes, "Hey, I don't wanna be picky or anything, but you're reading that way too fast." He's
Yeah.
like, "It's way too fast." He's like, "Slow down, take a nice deep breath." He's like, "And just ease your way into it." He's like, "It's better that you go slower
Yeah.
than to go too fast because you're gonna lose a lot of listeners this way."
Yeah, especially if you're doing a nonfiction book, because they need to retain that information. And the great thing is they can always hit one times, two times, one and a half times to increase their speed if they want to listen to it, but they can never go back and slow things down. So that's a little power tip there. So it's good that he stopped you and gave
Mhm.
you that heads up. Has he produced a lot of audiobooks for people?
The funny thing is he's done jingles, he's produced, major, bands and such like that in the Columbus area, yet he never did an audiobook.
Oh
So
wow.
when I sat down with him, it was, like, brand new to him, but it was so funny because I called him up and I said, "Hey, have you done audiobooks before?" He's like, "No," and I'm like, But he's like, "Bring in the specs." He's like, "Just show me the specs. I'll be able to get it dialed in." I'll be darned. He was right. I put it in front of him. He goes, "Okay." Did a few little things. He's like, "Okay, we're good to go." And I'm like that? I was like, I wish it was that simple for me."
What did you do to help with your nerves?
I think just him telling me, giving me permission to mess up
Mhm.
and to slow down was really what helped me out with the nerves. Because as soon as I was probably a half hour into the reading process and made a few mistakes, I was at ease. And so
Sure.
my nerves were gone. And I didn't see that nervousness as much in the 3 or 4 subsequent audiobook sessions that I did,
Yeah.
but it was still there nonetheless. And it was
Sure.
usually like he and I would crack a couple jokes, and then it was like, okay, let's get into this. We got to get
Sure.
ourselves focused. Every now and then when he could kind of hear that I was making the same mistake over and over, or if it sounded like my voice was fatiguing, he would go, "Take 5." And we just get up,
Mhm.
we'd walk around, just I'd listen to him chat for a while because I was trying to rest my voice. But beyond that, though, like the nervousness did go away. It's a case of you got to get knee deep into the weeds
Mhm.
before you can really truly appreciate where you're at and go, okay, now I know which way I'm going.
Yeah. So, what do you think caused those nerves? Just the first time experience, or what do you think contributed the most, to the nervousness that you had?
Performance anxiety.
Okay.
I think that it was a lot to do of, okay, this is costing me money to rent this studio out. So it's not like, he's gonna be like, well,
Sure.
you messed up, so I'll
Yeah.
give you a little bit of a cut on your bill. Wasn't one of those cases. So I think that from a financial standpoint, I was really nervous. But I think even more so, I was nervous about how readers or listeners would receive that,
Mhm.
because I've always been practicing like, hey, if you can narrate your audiobook, do it. It's a great way to do things. You can stay connected with your audience. They will be more invested in your audiobook than say if you just get somebody else. So there was some nervousness on this one because I was so worried that my audience would receive it poorly and go, "Ugh, Dale, yeah, stick to the videos, no good with the audiobooks." But I think once we had finished up and we were done doing the editing and mastering, we're going back and we're listening to it for the 50 millionth time. I was able to truly appreciate and go, okay, this isn't half bad. I'm actually pretty happy with it.
That's really interesting. I mean, that's a lot when you are Dale L. Roberts and you have a self-publishing brand, right? And then you put your name out there on the audiobook. I could see how that would be make you a little bit nervous, Yeah. So I definitely get it. I mean, just imagine though, like now you have an audiobook or several audiobooks. Actually, how many audiobooks do you currently have that
We
you've
currently
narrated?
have, let's see here, one, two, three, four with the bundle, permafreeze five, and I'm sitting on a sixth one that's going to launch sometime later this year. So yeah, about five published right now. One that's done, the editing's finishing, mastering's done. I just need to put a launch date together.
Yeah, I definitely get that. You definitely don't want to launch things prematurely, So I'm doing the same thing. I'm sitting on some things over here, and when it's time to release, I'll release. So timing is definitely important. So
Mhm.
that's another tip for those that are watching. You don't want to just release your audiobook just without any marketing, without any prep. You want to make sure that these things sell, and you release not only your audiobook but your ebook and your paperback at the same time. You know, I've heard, again, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard you'll increase your sales by like 30% when you do that. So
Yeah.
that's pretty powerful. I'm sure most of us in this business are in it to make money. So, 30% more revenue is definitely better than whatever you might get without that.
Yeah, I see a lot of people falling short of the goal, of really, because I get some people that will go, well, I don't do this for the money. Okay, what did you do it for? Well, I do it for the readers. Well, those readers have to pay you to get your book
Yeah.
unless you plan on just sending out free copies to everyone indefinitely and such like that. So, if you want more readers, you need to also understand that with readers comes that earnings. So try to be very, very aware of that. And Anthony, I'm glad that you tapped into something like this because more, authors need to understand they are leaving not just money on the table, but they're leaving readers out in the cold.
Yeah.
And these readers prefer audiobooks and it's on the rise. And I've already said it before, and there's even some other uh, big resources, including Ally, that have speculated that
Mhm.
audiobook sales will eclipse ebook sales. Will it eventually eclipse print sales? We will see. But I think that sometime in the near future, we're going to see how big audiobooks are. And anybody
Yeah.
that hasn't jumped on this bandwagon is going to be left in the cold.
Yeah, we're actually in the beginning stages, believe it or not. I mean, it may seem like audiobooks have been around for a while to those that have been self-publishing, but in all honesty, I mean, we're just at the cusp of a lot of growth. I mean, what was it? Is it 7 or 9 years straight growth? Double-digit growth within the audiobook industry already? So
It's crazy.
anybody that's not jumping into audiobooks, I mean, like you said, they're leaving money on the table and
Yeah.
listeners. So, question, kind of going back to your in the booth time, how
Mhm.
did your voice handle narrating the audiobooks? I mean, did you have any times where it just kind of gave out on you, or what was the dynamics there, and how did you solve potential problems with your voice?
Well, with the 2 hour one wasn't too bad. I've had experience in talking for 2 hours straight
Sure.
just from live streaming and such. So I have the stamina for it. Um, but when I went into book two, promotional strategies for books was a deeper manuscript. It was about 30,000 to 40,000 words, and I think a total of just short of 4 hours of content. And I believed going into the studio, yeah, well, let's go ahead and crank it out. Problem is, if you go back and you listen to that audiobook, you will hear the fatigue in my voice.
Hmm.
And we didn't really realize that until we were already like ship had sailed. We already edited, we already
Yeah.
mastered. We went in and you can kind of hear like, Dale, get yourself a glass of water. You sound like you're dying, man. So he and I were discussing because we even came in and did an additional session to do the bundle intro outro.
Okay.
We did Secrets of the Perma-Free Book, and we also did How to Write a Book in 48 Hours on that specific session. Now, that session was less than 2 hours. And the two of us, when we finished up, we looked at each other and we're like, from now on, let's not do any more than 2 hours at a time
Yeah.
because your voice is it's going to sound that way. And I don't know about you, Anthony, when I get into a particular walk of business, I don't do it to be second best. I want
Exactly.
to be the best. And so looking at that, do I feel ashamed or any form of regret that I pushed through despite, having that fatigue? No, I think it definitely represents a point in time where I could have probably had a better understanding. But now that I do understand it, I'm sure that if a second edition gets
Hmm.
released, I might actually go back in, redo the entire book, but this time in micro segments because it's just too much for anybody to try to do in any single one day.
Yeah. And here's the great thing, because you're the rights holder and the narrator, you can go back in at any time and update those files.
Yeah, so long as I don't get into any ultimate fights and someone punches me in the throat, I think I'm pretty good.
Yeah. You should be good. So, did you end up actually recording in a whisper room, or what kind of booth did you actually record in?
It was like a cathedral style room,
Oh
which was
wow.
like threw me off. I was thinking because he had a whisper booth. I'm like, "You were going over here?" He goes, "No, no, right here." And I'm like, "If you go over here though, that's where." He's like, "No, that's too hot in there." He's like,
Yeah.
"Besides, I got to move out a bunch of junk." I guess he had like a lot of his like crates and such in there, and I
Gotcha.
was like, "Okay." And I'm like, and I was really concerned because I was afraid there was gonna be a lot of, like, ambient room
Mhm.
noise. But he's like, "Oh, I got that." Just goes over, hits a couple little plugins and some doodads and such like
Mhm.
that, and next thing I know, boom, he pulls out that room ambience and
Yep.
gets it to where it sounds more up close and personal, as if it were a whisper room. Not quite as good, but still pretty darn good.
Yeah, I can vouch for how hot it can get in here. I mean, inside a double-walled whisper room with 4-inch foam panels and bass traps. So I get he's definitely on point with how hot it can get in here. Like I told you before, in the other interview that we did, air circulation is critical. So when you're out in an open area, if he has the plugins, that's great. That allows you to breathe a whole lot better. because when you're recording in a whisper room, you're going to get, a lot of dry mouth. You're going to have to take, sips of
Yep.
water. I mean, and I'm sure you were dealing with that as well because that nervousness that you were experiencing also contributes to your dry mouth.
Mhm. There was a lot of, like, mouth smackage, a lot more so on that second book because it was longer and it was going a little longer, and I remember he even gives me a hard time. He's just like, "Yep, I went ahead, cleaned up a lot of that mouth smackage." I'm like and of course, when he says things like that, it makes me self-conscious. He's like, "Loosen up, it's okay. I'm just" he was pretty much just giving me a hard time, but, he was able to go through it and fix a lot of that.
Yeah.
You don't consciously do anything like that, and you don't realize it until you have this expensive $3,000 microphone in front of you, and it sounds almost like it can pick up a mouse fart from a mile away.
Would you use the U87?
Oh my gosh, I don't know what it was. It was like a green one with a gold, cover over top of it. I'll have to snap a picture one of these times and share it with you.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's the mic that started it all for Dale Roberts narrating, right?
Yeah, there you go,
Got to
for
get a
sure.
picture of it. Yep.
Yep.
So, question: when you were narrating, right? Did you wear headphones? Because there's a debate whether to wear headphones or not wear headphones when you're actually narrating. So I'm just curious what you actually did when you narrated.
It was a little awkward at first because I thought I would be going without headphones,
Mm-hmm.
but he handed me the headphones and he was just like, "I want you to be able to hear yourself and hear your pacing and such like that." So he gave me in-ear monitors to where I could, excuse me, over-the-ear monitors to where I could kind of hear how I sounded.
Mm-hmm.
It drove me crazy after a while. I have no
Yeah.
idea how voiceover talent like you and other people are able to go hours at a time hearing their own voice inside their headphones. Because me, I was just like, "Oh, I wish this guy would shut up already."
Yeah. No, I personally don't use headphones. I do not use
Really?
headphones. I do a check, right? But I
Mhm.
don't because for me, I, I've had ear issues when I was younger, right?
Okay.
So when I wear headphones or whatever, like for a long time, I end up getting earaches,
Ooh.
right? And in addition to that, like you said, it's really weird hearing your own voice and it messes up your flow when you're trying to act, right? Because we don't need to hear ourselves to act. If you have the microphone positioned the correct way and you're the correct distance away, you have your settings good,
Mhm.
you don't need to focus on hearing yourself. You need to focus on your acting,
Mhm.
right? So for me, I found that the headphones were actually a deterrent. It was a distraction from, being able to act and present better because I'm so focused on my voice when like if I were to have the headphones on, you know, I don't need to be focused on my voice. I need to be focused on the manuscript.
Mhm.
So that for me, I don't ever wear the headphones anymore. I tried initially when I
Mhm.
first started because hey, I thought that's what you were supposed to do. But no.
Yeah.
For me, I can't do it, you
I
know.
think from a production standpoint, you're a one-man show, whereas I know I need to at least have the headphones on because he's in a recording room, like,
Mhm.
that's completely isolated away from his
Control
cathedral
room, yeah.
r Yeah, his whole control room, that's probably what he calls it. Any rate, typically, whenever I'd mess up, it was really neat because all I had to do was stop, I'd hold my hand up, he would go ahead, roll back, he would do the playback,
Mhm.
and typically I would go like this, I would signal to him to let him know, like, this is the point for me to punch back in. He'd punch me in, and I would just start reading like right away. So having that really helped out. I know for our first hour of working together, it was like, oh, shoot, we'll go back and fix that. Oh, shoot, we'll go back and fix that. And then after a bit, we had taken like a 5-minute break. I said, hey, why aren't we doing this like we do the music? Like,
Mhm.
whenever I'd mess up a solo, you would just have me go back in and just punch in on the solo area. And he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, absolutely. Let's do that." And that's why we were able to get such a good flow going. There was just so much we were in sync and it was
Gotcha.
getting it to where we could roll a lot smoother. So yeah, if you're able to find a local studio and work with somebody who knows what they're doing, they've got the great equipment and such like that, I would highly recommend definitely getting the over the ear cans
Mhm.
and getting it to where you're communicating with your engineer so that way you're not having to go back through and painstakingly cut out and edit some different things because it's
Yeah.
already going to be labor intensive pulling out all the breaths, making sure all the
Yeah.
levels look good, if there's any kind of weird ambient sounds, you clean that up. So that was where I think from a production standpoint, having a 2 people team made it more efficient for me.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I mean, especially when you've never narrated anything before. I mean, it definitely helps to have that extra set of hands when you're doing what you need to do, so you can focus on reading your manuscript the way that it
Mhm.
needs to be read. So that's pretty cool. Do you know what program that you guys end up recording on?
No, I don't. It might have been Pro Tools, but I
Okay.
could be 100% off on that, to be honest with you. I know he uses Mac. He's
Okay.
a big Mac
Sure.
head. Everything's Mac across his studio and such. Funny thing is too, actually, he actually has an old school reel to reel, like, audio recording device, and it like,
Oh wow.
it should probably be a relic. He should probably have this thing showcased and put in the Smithsonian. Not even kidding.
Wow.
It's absolutely fascinating. It looks almost like something Led Zeppelin might have recorded one of their albums on.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Wow. I wonder where he got that from.
Years and years of doing it. I think he's been in the business for 40 years.
Oh
So
wow.
this is why I hugely trusted him, is because he is so knowledgeable about sound and
Hmm.
about audio engineering that I was like, okay, this is my guy.
Yeah. Gotcha. Cool. So when you were actually recording, did you sit or did you stand? The age old question.
I sat. I
Okay.
sat because, well, sort of, but not really.
Okay.
I know you're like, "Did you not? Did you
Stool?
really?" He actually brought in a bar stool
Okay.
that I was able to sit down on and just prop my feet up. So I was slightly standing sometimes. I am very much ADHD,
Yeah.
that I have a lot of hyperactivity that I have to manage, and some of
Hmm.
that includes adjusting, like, even as you and I are
Yeah.
talking right now, you've probably seen me adjust myself numerous
Dude,
times in my
I'm doing the
chair.
same thing.
Yeah, you just keep yourself moving, and so, I just make sure that when I am recording, that I'm not doing it in the middle of saying something, so I don't move my leg,
Hmm.
I don't try to shift into a half standing position or anything else like that
Gotcha.
while I'm saying something, so I'll wait for a track to be complete, and then I'll straighten myself out, because there's those extraneous noises.
Hmm.
You can just literally just, breathe slightly different, and he'll be able to hear that.
Yeah.
That was a huge, huge part of the whole process for me.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So do you think you would prefer to stand or would you prefer to sit? Like if you had to do it all over again?
I'm gonna continue to do seated. I'm gonna
Okay.
do seated, especially bar stool, but you couldn't be able to get me like a regular seat like what I'm sitting in right
Gotcha.
now, because there's just not much room for me to stretch my legs out, go to half standing or seated. But yeah, I'll probably stick with seated. I understand though from my music background that standing up helps you to project more from your
Yeah.
diaphragm,
Yeah.
and you've got more of an energetic and passionate release of your voice, as opposed to when you're seated, it's going to be a little bit more neutral.
Yeah.
This is information, and I'm sorry, it's very anecdotal. I won't be able to cite my sources on
Sure.
something like this, but I know from experience, so far, I've really liked it, just being able to sit down and slightly stand when I need to.
Yeah, no, you're 100% correct with, being standing up, and having a little bit more energy and things like that. You know, for me, like acting is a physical, thing. I'm also one of those dudes that really doesn't like to stay still for a long time, even though I have to. With certain things that I'm doing, I have to
Yeah.
like even right now I'm standing up. There is not a chair or a stool or anything in my whisper room. I have one. It's sitting outside the booth, but I have yet to use it, you know,
Yeah.
because when I get into it, like you need space to move around and think, at least for me, you know, acting is physical, like when you really, like when I was doing your Grumpy Gus books, you know, like I was getting into, so I had to move around a little bit. If I was in a chair,
Yeah.
that it wouldn't have been able to happen. So, but yeah, I mean, you got to find something. Whether there's no right or wrong answer with this. You know,
Mhm.
I mean, there's people with disabilities. There's people that just prefer sitting.
Mhm.
Because they can sit down and focus and knock it out. Whatever works. There's no wrong answer there. So I was just curious as to if you stood or if you sat down. Cool.
Yeah, admittedly, as I do sit, I did notice this, and as you're saying this, it occurred to me, yeah, I gesticulate a lot. I use my hands a lot.
Yeah.
And so The funny thing is when I was going to record this, I still treated it almost like I was doing live streaming video on YouTube
Okay.
to where I was having a conversation, and so instead of me focusing on a camera, I just went ahead and focused on the microphone that was in front of me like I was telling a story to it,
Mhm.
and that really helped me out with the whole performance end of things, but that's one of the things, gesticulating, just
Yeah.
moving those hands, they were going wild all over the place, and I know that every session I did, I always left just completely drenched in sweat
Yeah.
because I get into it so
Yeah.
much. The delivery, it's like a marathon, man. If you go in
Yeah.
and do this for 2 hours, try to talk for 2 hours straight. I encourage anybody that's watching this that has never done this before, do it. Because if you do 2 hours of just talking straight, you'll see it's grueling. It's not easy.
No, it's definitely not easy. I mean, it's gonna take some discipline to get it done, and perseverance. I mean, if you don't have discipline and you don't have perseverance, you shouldn't get into the game.
No, no.
So it seems like when you were recording, you did what is called the punch and roll method.
Mhm.
And it seems initially you were just letting things go and doing a straight record, and then you had a talk with them, and then you guys did punch and roll, and that seemed to work better for you. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, it was so much better. It worked so much more smoothly. I hate wasting time.
Yeah.
And anytime I can look at a process that's not efficient and make it more efficient, the
Mhm.
better. In fact, I'm always doing that. Everything from how I handle social media to how I do my email marketing to how I book out my schedules. I try to find out the most efficient way of doing things without sacrificing quality.
Yeah.
And to me, it really wasn't going to make a difference if I punched in just 2 seconds later because it's not like we've changed the mic position.
Mhm.
We haven't gotten me to leave the room and come
Sure.
back. So it seemed like a great use of our time versus going back and hearing me, doing a clap track, be
Mhm.
like, okay, this is where I messed up. Clap, clap. Okay, here we go. Let's get back into it. And, it was funny as we were going through, Dan Green's the gentleman's name. Dan's sitting down and he's just like, man, we really should have been punching you in a lot sooner because he's going through and fixing all the first half hour of mistakes at
Mhm.
that time. And he really liked doing just the hands on experience because he's sitting behind this giant, you know, uh, it's like panel of just switches and knobs and like honestly he would probably knows everything that's on there. When I look at it, I'm just like, wow, that looks like a freaking call center like
Yeah.
directory right there. Are you going to get ready to patch somebody through? But for some reason he made it work. It was absolutely amazing. But yeah, optimizing everything is absolutely critical. And I think if it makes his job easier as an engineer to just be
Yeah.
active and be at standby while I'm recording, then better. And I even told him, I'm like, hey, look, I know this is probably not your normal thing. I was like, so if you need to charge me more, I'd be happy
Sure.
with it. Because for bands, he would just sit down and only have to record a 5-minute song and
Mhm.
then have to go in and do it. Whereas with this, it's like you're doing a
Yeah.
2-hour epic masterpiece or sometimes even longer, and he's having to sit there actively doing this like, "Oh,
Yeah.
here we go, he messed up again." But the cool thing is we got a system, and it was great because I think on our last session, all I'd have to do is just raise my hand up, he would stop, he'd go, "Roll back," and he'd play it, and I just cue him up, and we just jump right back into it.
Yeah, punch and roll will save you a huge amount of time in the back end, of your post-production process. If you just do a straight record, you're going to have a ton of mistakes that you're going to have to go back and fix. And I've done that the first few books, and now I do what's called like I call it a modified punch and roll. I'll let
Mhm.
it go a little bit. I'll make a few mistakes, and then I'll come back. So that way I'm not punching in every time and coming back. That could get annoying too. So I kind of have a balance between both worlds there. So
I'm sure it probably would play a role in your psyche after a while too, because
yeah,
when you make one mistake and you're like, "Oh, I gotta go back. Okay, here we go," and you cue it up. Okay, this is the spot, and then you mess it up again.
yeah. There's always
I'm fortunate that I had an engineer that only had to worry about it. I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't get too frustrated. Although
mhm,
when I would get to like the fifth or sixth take, he would go 5 minutes. Let's take five
yeah,
minutes because he knew that it was playing a little role in me kind of messing up.
yeah. I mean, you're always gonna have words that you're going to struggle with or phrases or whatever. I heard somebody in a video that I watched, um, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. You know, writers, when they actually read their book out loud for the first time, right? They actually will say, "Who wrote this shit?" Like that's their thought, like, because they just can't believe it was them writing the book because it sounds horrible when they are reading it out loud. And that's a good editing tip for anybody out there in the self-publishing world that wants to make great audiobooks. Read it out loud as part of your editing process. And that's going to go a long way to making really, really great audiobooks. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a quick break and have a moment from our sponsor here today, and then we'll get right back into it after this break. This video is brought to you by Fleischmann Media, LLC, professional voiceover services and more. Do you need professional voiceover services? Want 20% off your first order? Check out our website at fleischmannmedia.com. So how long did it take you to actually complete your audiobook? Like your first one?
The first one was 2 hours of content, and it took us probably 6 hours total production time the first day. As you can imagine, he was new to the whole process,
Mm-hmm.
so when we went to upload it through Audiobook Creation Exchange, they were like, nope.
Ah.
Find Away Voices were totally fine with it,
Mm-hmm.
but for whatever reason, ACX was feeling that our cushion at the intro and the outro of each track
Mm-hmm.
wasn't enough, and they also said there was extraneous noise, and it was so funny because Dan was just losing his mind. We had to, like, volley it back a few times, and he's like,
Yeah.
"You gotta be kidding me. I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've produced some of the most famous jingles here in the Columbus area and produced some of these bands. You're telling me that I can't hear these extraneous sounds on here
Mm-hmm.
and you can?" Like, he's like putting it, he's trying to like scrutinize it and he's not hearing any sound effects. So we
Yeah.
went through, we kept fixing it. So I would say, yeah, it took us 6 hours that first day. But I think it took probably an additional hour to 2 hours of him going back, fixing the
Sure.
tracks so it was compliant with ACX, which they finally accepted. It was totally compliant. That was the big heartache, and I know for him, he got really frustrated. It was almost personal to him. And if Dan's watching this, Dan, hey, I might be speaking out of turn and saying that he took it personally, but sometimes he was just like, "Don't they know who I am?"
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it can be very, very frustrating and disappointing to go through all of this, work and this labor to produce an audiobook and then not have it actually get accepted by ACX. And, you know, that's a tough one. So anybody that's looking to narrate audiobooks, they need to first, number one, know what the ACX specs are and follow them religiously. Because if you don't, it's going to come back. And producing music, as your friend, found out, is way different than producing audiobooks.
It is.
Because ACX does not play games. Like, they just really are stricklers for their specific specs. And I don't know if you know, but their specs for their in and their out has actually changed a little bit just recently. So that's a recent
Interesting.
development. So something to note there. So I think we've talked a little bit already about how difficult it was to narrate your own audiobook. So I don't want to belabor that. What were some of the biggest struggles you faced when narrating and producing your own audiobook? I mean, obviously the ACX specs gave you a hard time, but more so when you were in there narrating, you know, like your specific situation when you were narrating your audiobook, not necessarily with the producer, but for you. What was your biggest struggles when you were narrating your audiobook?
For me, it was quelling those nerves
Mm-hmm.
and speaking in a clear fashion that was nice and slow, but not too slow. Because obviously you don't want to sound
Sure.
super slow, but you want to get it to where you're reading at a cadence that is translatable to everybody. But that was probably my biggest issue. And I'm sure it's always been my biggest issue because, even when I was in a rock band, we would have a song that would say be like 80 beats per minute, in a studio, but then we go out and play it live, and all of a sudden it's 144 beats per minute. You're kind of going, What's going on?"
Yeah.
It's because you get excited, you get that
Mhm.
adrenaline going. You're like, "Oh, let's get this done." And I think probably in my mind, I'm thinking of, okay, I just want to be done with this. Like, I
Mhm.
want to record my part and let him kind of do all the engineering, editing, mastering, all that stuff. So I can just sit back and look pretty and just, chime in
Yeah.
every now and then. But that was probably is just trying to get past that thinking of, well, let's get this finished. Let's hurry up and get this finished. And hurrying anything is not going to put out a good high quality product.
Something I was thinking about, um, that went back, changing subjects real quick. Going back
Mhm,
to something you had said earlier about looking at the mic when you were recording
mhm.
instead of like the video. Because if you were to narrate this potentially at your house, right, you could actually use the video. You could put up a video with whatever um, program that you have, OBS or whatever, and look at yourself as you're narrating. And that may actually help you to get into the manuscript a little bit better because you can actually look at yourself and like you typically are when you're doing live stream or YouTube videos. So if you end up doing that, it's just something to consider.
It's crossed my mind actually before, and I think I'd even mentioned to Dan, I was like, "Hey, in a future project, it'd be awesome if we just set up a camera
Yeah,
and just record the entire experience." And he's got the internet access there. We'd be able to even live stream if we wanted to,
sweet.
take that specific content and edit it down and probably even sell the actual video version of that if I wanted to, or maybe even include it as a downloadable file along with the audiobook.
Wow. So that's great. You've already actually thought about that ahead of time, solving those problems. That's what you were talking about, analyzing situations and solving problems.
I'm a video guy. I think
Yeah.
like video is my thing. And sometimes I there are certain aspects of my life that I don't want a camera in my face.
Hmm.
Like, my wife and I are getting ready to go on our 10-year anniversary, and not a single time is my phone gonna come up. I mean,
Sure.
unless I'm looking up something on Yelp or something crazy like that. But, there are some parts of my life I don't want to document. Instances like that where I'm already deeply entrenched in something work related,
Hmm.
I have no issue putting up a couple cameras to
Sure.
document the process because there are different consumers out there, different types of needs, and
Hmm.
some people want to listen and some people like to watch.
Yeah.
I think that from the standpoint of if I knew that Anthony Fleischmann was putting out an audiobook and also he put an entire video series of him recording that audiobook, I'd probably be pretty interested to check it
Hmm.
out. And it would just be another little touchstone, another little asset, if you will, that's going to bring in additional readers, followers,
Yeah.
listeners, however you wanna shake it.
Sure. And I think even Gary Vee actually says to document and not to create. I think that's one of his main principles. And I think you hit the nail right on the head. You know, document whatever it is because it's going to bring in the traffic, and the traffic ultimately is going to lead to more revenue in your pocket one way or another because it all
Yeah.
funnels down. So
Mhm.
that's pretty cool. What do you think you could have done or you could have used to make the process of recording your own audiobook a little bit easier for you?
Um,
That was a deep
m
breath.
Yeah, I would say and more preparation because the first time around, I didn't do much preparation, so there was a lot of
Hmm.
punching in on a lot of mistakes. I was like, "Ooh, that doesn't sound right on an audiobook." So then the subsequent books that I did after that, I learned, "Okay, I gotta go in." But even then, there were still some mistakes, so I probably need to take a manuscript, let's say 20 to 40,000 words, and I need to probably spend about a month of going back and truly analyzing this from a standpoint of how is this going to sound?
Hmm.
So I can't, stress this enough. Trying to say, all right, I'm going into the studio tomorrow. I'm just going to go ahead and fix the manuscript tonight. Don't do
Yeah,
that.
no.
Okay. Cause you're still going to have a ton of mistakes. You might as
Yeah.
well just go on in and continue to go ahead and punch in wherever, cause you're just wasting your time. So I would say spending a little bit more time going through that manuscript, making sure that it is truly ready. And if there are some specific things that I say out loud
Hmm.
that trips me up that I need to fix now, because there were some times where I was like, I don't know, there would be a sentence that seemed like I was trying to go for alliteration. I was like, "What? What's going on here? Like, there's a hard C
Why do I
all the way
sound British
across
all of a
this."
sudden? Okay.
Right, yeah, like, did I become Dr. Seuss and not be
Yeah,
aware of it?
yeah. Gotcha. Yeah, you can do a lot of crazy things when you're narrating the audiobook. And like it's just part of the whole creative process. You just got to work through it and, you know, find your rhythm. I guess you recorded the whole audiobook in one day. Is that correct?
Yes, each one of the audiobooks I recorded in one day with the
Okay.
exception of those last 3 that I was talking about. The bundle was, like, literally 5 minutes of content that I had to do for the bundle of 3 books.
Gotcha.
Secrets of Perma-Free book was, like, half hour.
Mhm.
The How to Write a Book in 48 Hours, another half hour. So it was all really, really quick.
Gotcha.
Nothing too long. If I had to do it over again, I probably won't be in the studio longer than 2 hours, meaning that
Gotcha.
there will probably be way less talk time. So probably a little closer to an hour, hour and 15 minutes of actual talk time that'll be used. I'd rather do that than have to, pay Dan to sit down and clean up like
Sure.
dry mouth sounds or like Dale, you sound like you just left a metal concert, like your voice is all raspy. I can't tell what you're saying.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, I mean for people that are narrating at their house in their own little studio, typically I don't think that they narrate all in one setting. And in fact, a lot of times that's kind of not the greatest idea to do. So I'm surprised that you went that route. But I guess if you're paying for the money up front for a studio, you kind of have to kick it out all in one time because going back and
Yeah.
forth could probably get pretty expensive.
It will, but I think probably going forward, it will make for a better finished product. So I know I've got 5 books on the back burner right now. One of them is already produced that I did. So I've got about another 4 that I'll do, but I will probably just end up putting maybe like a twice per week type schedule that I'll go out to Hilliard to
Gotcha.
record that over at Marisound Studios and spend just 2 hours there because he and I just both agreed he likes my money. Obviously, he
Sure.
has no qualm with taking my money. But in the same instance, I want to make sure that it's a good, high quality product because not only does it reflect on me really well, it also reflects on him really well.
One final question for you then. What tips do you have for somebody new that wants to narrate their own audiobooks?
Um, just do it. Just start. That's the most important thing, and understand that you need to allow yourself room to make mistakes and not sound the greatest at first. They always say your first book is your worst book.
Mhm.
I truly believe that your first audiobook is your
Sure.
worst audiobook, and I look over at the one that I did, and I felt like there was lots of room for improvement that I could have done in there,
Sure.
but thankfully, I didn't hold myself back by trying to expect perfection on it.
Gotcha. Well, Dale, thanks so much again for taking some time out to share your knowledge and experience with us. Hope to do it again in the future. And before we go, why don't you tell people where they can reach you once again?
You can find me over at selfpublishingwithdale.com. Again, that's selfpublishingwithdale.com. You'll find everything from YouTube to Instagram to TikTok to podcasts and everything else in between on that website, selfpublishingwithdale.com.
All right. I thank you very much, Dale. Have a great day.
Thank you.